Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is doing some basic math. We're going to learn how to make methods and then just do some basic loopings and ifs if we have time. So before we get to any of the methods or anything, we're going to start with just doing math. So we're going to make a basic program that asks for two numbers, x and y, and then adds them together. So I'm just going to do a console dot read line. We're going to put that into a double value. We're going to call this x. And so we're going to get an error here. And the error is cannot implicitly convert type string to double. And so there are a few ways that we can handle this. The way that I like to do it is going to be we call double dot parse, and that takes a string value and it parses it into a double, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So if we put something that isn't a double into here, it's going to throw an error. So if we put an integer in there, it's fine. It's just going to cast it as, let's say we put 2, it's just going to cast it as 2.0, right? So that makes it a double. But if we put the word 2 in there, then it's going to throw an error that says it can't be parsed. So a better way, instead of doing this, which is very error prone, is going to be to take the user input and we're going to see if it's a double or not. So we can say user input equals console dot read line, and we're going to do an if statement here. So if, then we're going to do open close parentheses, and this is where we put our condition. And so we're going to say double dot try parse, and we see that this returns a Boolean, which is what an if statement needs in order to execute. It needs to be either a true or false value. And we do try parse. And what try parse takes, inside of right here, we see the method name, try parse. And then inside of the parentheses, it tells us what values it takes, the signature of this method. So it takes a string, and the output of it, the out variable, is going to be a double result. So it casts the string for you and populates a double value. This is a little bit more advanced, so we won't focus on that right now. I'll show you a brief example. So what we're going to do is user input. Oh, well, actually, never mind. We have to use it if we do try parse. So what we're going to do is we're going to declare our double x up here. Comment that out. We're going to do x. And then we do squirrely brackets to declare the scope of our if statement. So everything inside of here will execute whenever double dot try parse is successful. There we go. We have to put out because this is an output value. So there's two ways to return from a method. The standard way is how this returns a Boolean value, and the less standard is you give it something. So in this instance, we're giving it an x, and then the program modifies that value, and once you're over here, this will have a value now. So this is going to have the casted value of our user input.
Okay.
In general, we shouldn't make methods that do this. It's much better to just return values from methods, but sometimes it's easiest to do this kind of thing. So once we're in here, we know that our double has a value, and we can continue to ask for our y value. And we can reuse our user input because we don't need to make another one, since we're just using this string as a temporary holder. We're going to do a read line again. And then we do the same thing to check y. Now, whenever you do it this way, it gets very, you nest things a lot, right? So a better way, instead of saying if it is a double, you would say if it's not a double. So what we're going to do, we're going to cut this, move it down here, and we're just going to change this to a not. Now, this is just an if statement, so it checks one thing at a time. But really, in order to, because we want the user to keep repeating a certain line of code over and over again until they give us a correct double value, right? So first let's actually ask the user. So we're going to do a quick write line here, and it's going to say enter x. So they're going to enter an x value, and I'm going to comment this out for a sec. We're going to do a while loop. So a while loop is very similar to an if, in that inside of these brackets you have to supply a Boolean value. If you wanted it to be an infinite loop, you can say true, and it's just going to over and over again ask the user to put a number in, right? I actually want to put this text over here, but we don't want it to do an infinite loop. We want it to check, is the user input a parsable value? So we're going to do this, and we have a scope. So scope means a variable. You can't declare a variable, you can't use a variable before you declare it. And that's what we're doing right here, what I did inadvertently. I put x over here before we declared it, and then we declared it down here. So I am just going to cut it and paste it up here so that we have our user input and our x value. And then let's see what this is complaining about. Use of an unassigned local variable user input. So it's just complaining that we haven't given it a value. Now it should give it a default value of null. not quite sure why it was complaining about it. By default, a string's value is null. And our double is going to have a default value of 0.0. So first, we're going to do a try parse on our null value. And if it's able to be parsed, then it returns true. This would return true. And then we not it. The exclamation mark here basically flips whatever Boolean value it was given. So an example would be true. So just true equals true, which it does. But if you wanted to flip it, you would put a not. So not true actually equals false, right? Same thing that we're going to be doing over here. So this is going to return true, and then we'll flip it to a false. And then once this value, overall value, is false, it jumps out of the loop, so we won't be in it anymore. So the first time we enter it, user input isn't going to be a good value. It's going to throw an error, and it's going to cause this to return false, which then gets flipped to true. So it's going to continue down to say enter an X value, and then we're going to give our user input hopefully a good value, say 1.0, and then it goes up, it reaches this, and it says, okay, I need to go back to the top because I'm inside a while loop, which it knows because of these squiggly braces. And it says, okay, the user inputted 1.1. Can I convert that into a double value? And it can. So it returns true, then it gets negated to false, thereby flipping out of this while loop and then continuing down with the program. So before we do anything else, let's actually see what this does, and we'll just put a console.writeLine, and we're going to print out our X value. I'm going to debug into this code, so I'm going to press F5, and right away we hit it. Alright, so we'll press F10 to continue down, and we'll see we're going into the loop now, and it's going to write enter X, and then we do a read line. So let's enter not valid. You see our program is continuing on. We go back to the while. Our user input is now not valid. The text that we entered, the X value is still 0. So this is going to return false, and then this will negate it back to a true, and we'll continue down and we'll ask the user for an input again. Write line, enter X, and then we do a console.readLine. I'll hit F10 one more time, and we're back to the program. So it displayed enter X, and we're going to put in 2.1. We're going to hit enter. Back to our program, jump back up to the while loop. User input is a string 2.1. So we're going to hit F10 one more time, and now we're out, because this returned true and then got negated to false. So we got out of the loop. And if we look at x, it got populated to 2.1, which, as we see over here, is our double variable. Now we hit F10 one more time, go back to the program, and that's whenever we printed out 2.1. So, a successful program that takes your user's input. We're asking for a double value, and then we don't take no for an answer until they put a double value in.
Okay, this one's probably gonna take me a while to like memorize.
Yeah, this one has more going on. And so we do that, and we get our x value, right? And so we need to do, not only do we need an x value, we also need a y value, because, you know, we're going to do simple addition, right? Just x plus y. So we'll go ahead and initialize this variable, 0.0. You can do 0. Works just fine. And we're going to take this line of code, just copy it right underneath it. Because we're going to do the same thing, except we need to change our x variable to be our y variable, because we need to get the second one, right? So we get y, and then we say enter y, and then we override our user input until they give us a correct y value. And we can go ahead and we can tell them enter a double value for x. Enter a double value for y. All right. And there we have it. So we do that. And then we're going to print our y value. And we're just going to say user entered x equals that. And we'll say user entered y equals, and then we'll display our y value. And even though these are decimal numbers, because we're doing the plus with a string, it's still going to do string concatenation like we saw earlier. If this was a double number, if this was a number of some sort on the other side instead of a string, then it would do addition. And that isn't quite what we want. But right underneath, I'll show you what I mean by doing the addition. So we'll say console.writeLine, and we're just going to say x plus y equals, and here we need to do x plus y. Now, depending on how familiar you are with math and the order of operations, this isn't quite going to do what we want it to do. But let's take a look and let's see what happens. Okay, so we'll do 5.0. Okay, I broke something.
Mine was broken a while ago. I just didn't want to say anything.
Oh.
I'm just following through yours now.
All right, well, that's fine. Oh. So, I made a classic mistake. Whenever the code got to here and went to the second while loop, I didn't clear out my user input. So, it still has 5. Whenever it did this calculation or ran this method, it said, okay, user input is 5.0, and that's valid, so I'm not even going to enter this, and I'm not even going to ask you for a y value because this is still a good value. So the way we fix this is we simply clear it out. And the way we clear out our user input is going to be by setting it back to its original value, which is null, which means no value. It's not even an empty string. It is no value exists for this object. So we're going to say user input, and we're going to set it to null. So we're going to enter a value for x, say 5. Going to pop out because 5 is a good value. X is going to be equal to 5. User input is now going to be reset to its original value, which is null. And then we're going to continue by asking for a double value for y. And after we get our y value, we continue down and display the x plus y portion. Let's try that one more time without my debug statement. 5. And you don't need a decimal point like I thought. And the program ended without displaying x plus y. So let's put a console.readline right down here just to keep the window open after our debug. Enter a double value for x. So we'll do x is equal to 2, and y is going to be equal to 4. And there we see user entered 2 for x equals 2, and user entered y equals 4, but for somehow x plus y equals 24. Do you have any idea of what could be happening here?
No.
No? Okay, so whenever we said x plus y right here, the order of operations did this first, which said, oh, you're doing string concatenation. That's what this plus means. So it displayed x plus y equals, and then say this 4 doesn't exist yet, x plus y equals 2, because it concatenated the value of x, which is 2, to this string here. Then it got to this plus symbol, and it said, are you doing string concatenation, or are you trying to add numbers together? And it said, well, I'm looking on this side, and all I see is a string. So you're doing string concatenation. You're trying to display 4 plus the string, which gets displayed as 24. So x plus y equals 24. That's what you asked me to do. Perfect. We made a perfectly fine adding program. But what we want it to do is we want it to actually add these as decimals, as numbers. We want it to add these first, and then concatenate that to this string value. And just like in math, the way that we give something precedence for the order of operations is going to be by putting parentheses around it, just like this. And so now it's going to compute x plus y first, and then it's going to give us our value. Then it will use string concatenation to go over here. So enter a double value for x. We'll do 2 again. Enter a value for y. We'll do 4. And here we see it worked out. So 4 plus 2, 6, and then gets concatenated on with our x plus y string. So now we've made a good complex program, but we want to make it more reusable. And what I mean by that is we want to move. Let's say we want to make a calculator, right? So we're going to have a lot of different types of functions on this calculator. We're going to have an add, a subtract, a divide, a multiply, things like that. And we could just keep it in a line and just keep going down in this one page and make it do everything that we need to do. But that's not the best way to do it. A good way is going to be for us to learn about methods and how to use those effectively. So we've actually been inside of a method this whole time. We have static, which means it's unchanging. It's static. It's not going to change inside of this class. Void, which means it doesn't return anything. And then main is the name of the method, main. And then it has arguments. And these aren't being used by us. The arguments are whenever you go into a command prompt and you do a, say, run la.exe, you can put arguments over here and it's going to execute it. That's the same kind of thing these args are. It's just arguments that it can get from command line or from any other source. Most likely command line, because that's how it's going to be executed, not inside of Visual Studio. So whenever we make a method, we need to do it inside of our class. A class is just a representation of an object is really what it is. So right now we have a program. This could be anything. It could be an apple, it could be a card, or a car, lots of things. So the class is going to define what your object is. So it's going to have variables inside of it and methods, which is what we're trying to do here. So it already has one method, and we're going to add a second method. So we have to find where this main ends. We can follow the dotted line down, and it ends right here. So we're going to do some enters. Well, yeah. So we're going to enter out, and we're going to say, what do we want this method to return? Or we're going to do a method that does x plus y. So we want it to return x plus y, which is going to be a double value. So we return a double. And now we say, what do we want the name of this to be? And we're just going to say add. We're going to call it add. We're going to do some open and closed parentheses. And then just to make our compiler happy, we're going to do our squiggly braces. So inside of our parentheses, this is the signature of our method, what the arguments that we provide to it. Just like we gave arguments to the main method, we're going to give arguments to our add method. And as you could have guessed, the arguments are going to be the x value and the y value. So first you do the data type, and the data type of x is a double. So double x. Then we're going to do our next variable, which is going to be a double and a y. Oh, I did forget one thing. You need to declare how visible this function is. And there are a couple different visibility options that you can give. For our purpose, most of them don't matter. So you can say it is a private method, and this means that this class, that program, is the only one that is allowed to use the add method. Nobody else can do it. Nobody that makes a class program is allowed to do add. Or you can say it's public, which means anybody can use it. Go ahead and add to your heart's content. Another one is going to be protected, and we'll get into this one a little bit later, but it's for inheritance. So let's say you have a class that's name is car. So it represents a car object, right? A general car, just a car. It has wheels on it. It can drive a certain speed. That's how you choose to define your car. But let's say there's also a motorcycle. Well, a motorcycle isn't quite a car, but it's close, similar. It has wheels and it can drive a certain speed. So it can inherit from car the ability to have wheels and the ability to have a speed. So a motorcycle can be a car. And that's what protected would mean. That motorcycle would be able to say, okay, this is my speed. Because I'm a car, I have a speed because it's protected. But other things, maybe a deck of cards, wouldn't be able to have a speed because it would not inherit from the car. And that's a little confusing, but we'll get into objects and inheritance later. And for this, right now, we're just going to say private. We're the only ones that really need to use this right now. And the only thing this method needs to do is add x and y together, right? So we'll just, let's go ahead and we'll make it very simple. We'll make a double variable. We'll call it the result. And it's going to be equal to x plus y. End statement. So now we have our result here, and we need to return it back to the main program, back to the user. And the way you do it is by using the return keyword. And so you put return, and then you put what it is you need to return. So we would say result and end our statement. And this is a complete method. So if we do something, if we mess up for some reason, and let's say we accidentally returned a string, 2.5. This is the kind of error we're going to get. It's going to say can't implicitly convert type string to double. So it expects this return expects this to be a double value because we told it right over here that it's going to be a double. Now I'll change this just for a sec to a string, and we'll see that goes away because now it's expecting a string. But that's not what we want. We want it to be a double. We want this to be our result. So now we have a method, and we need to use that method, right? So where we do our x plus y is right here. We're going to make it a little easier on ourselves. And we're just going to make a new value. We're going to call it add result It's going to be the result of our add method. We're going to call add. Oops. Oh, I actually forgot one thing. Because we're inside of a static method, we're going to have to make all of our helper methods static as well. And that just means there can only be one. There can only be one method, and it's the same. So static private double. And I believe we can actually move those words around. But I like to go in this order. Private, static, double, add. Now, we do add, and we can see it right here. Program.add takes a double x and a double y and returns a double. So we'll do add. We're going to give it x. And then we can see it's helping us here. So we already gave it an x, and now it's telling us that we can give it a y value. So we're going to give it a y. And now we have add result. So we don't need to do our add here anymore because we already have the result. So we're going to go ahead and paste it right over top. And now we're going to run it and see what happens. So we're going to enter a value for x. Let's see if it breaks. So we'll put bad in. Bad doesn't work. Okay, what if we put a 4 for x? Okay, enter a value y. Bad, bad. That works fine too. Very good. And we'll put a 6 for y. There, the user entered 4 and y equals 6. And x plus y equals 10. And we were able to do that from a method, which is very impressive. Another good use of a method would be to abstract this bit out so that instead of having to copy and paste, because let's say we needed to ask for 5 variables, x, y, z, 1, 2, we would have to copy and paste this 5 times. That's a good way to know whenever you should really make a method, is when you find yourself doing this. So like if we added a z, you would have to say, okay, we're gonna make another z. Already copied and pasted this. Let's clear out our user input. And now make another z and ask for z. And now we have z. But, you know, we had to copy and paste all of this code, where if it was a method, we would have only had to do this, do one line of code. And so let's go ahead and let's think about what do we need to do in order to make this a method. So our method is going to have a user input, which goes into a loop and doesn't exit the loop until the user entered a double. Once they did enter a double, though, we can return that double back to the main program. So let's do a little comment here of what we want it to look like. So we'll say double x, because that's going to be the name of one of our variables. It's going to be equal to get double from user. Right? So something like this. That would be really nice. That'd be a nice thing, because then we could just do that, the same thing for y, and we wouldn't have to mess with any of that. So let's go ahead and make get double from user. So we're going to come down here to below our last method, and we're going to make another private static, and then we decided we wanted to return a double, so we'll make it a double, and then we'll paste our name, get double from user. And so what are the things that this needs to take? Well, I don't think it really needs to take anything. So we're just not going to put anything in there, because we're going to be getting all of our information from the user, from console.readLine. So we have our method stubbed out right down here. And what we can do, just to get a good starting point for our method, is we can take this section of code over here, copy it, because this is what we want to make a method out of. And we're going to go down to our get double from user, paste it, and see what we need to fix. So we have a user input. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. So we're going to put it inside of our method. String user input, and we're going to just initialize that with a null value. Okay, we fixed that. We fixed that value. And now we have an out value, which is enter the name, or the name X does not exist in the current context. So we can do a double X. So we initialized our X value. Now we need to focus on what happens whenever the user did put in a correct double value, and now we need to return it. And we'll see if we hover over here, it's giving us the error, not all code paths return a value. And that just means we didn't do this step right here. We didn't return anything where we say it needs to, because we gave it a double value here. So if we say return X, because down here X will have a value, because we don't let the user exit this loop until they put a good X value in here. And so one thing that I'm seeing is we have enter a double value for X. And that's going to be the same every time we call this method. So I think we might need to take something from the program. We just need to display the right string right here, because that's the only thing that we can't change right now. So we are going to take a string value. We're going to call it a variable name, because it's just the name that we want to display right here. And instead of doing the string concatenation like this, where I put this into here, I don't like doing this as much. So what we're going to do is we're going to do our string interpolation by putting a $sign here. That way I can use curly braces and paste my variable right into here, and it's going to get displayed without me having to do any formatting. Alright, so now we have our get double from user, which returns a double. So we can go back up to the top of our program. Let's get rid of Z because we don't need that one. So our X value, we're going to delete, and we'll say X equals get double from user. And what does it need? It needs a string variable name. So we're going to give it a string, and this is what's going to get displayed to the user. x. All right, and we don't need to clear out user input because we don't actually need it anymore, because we're going to be deleting this, and that's the only thing left that uses it. So this sets the y value to the user input. So we're going to delete it and replace it with y equals get double from user. And then we want to say display y for me. And I'll pretty this up. And there. That looks very much like what we wanted down here. So very good. And we can see it really cleaned up the code, because it basically cut the amount of code that we needed in half just to get our x and y values, because we're doing it all down here. So let's run it real quick and make sure it still works. Oh, my build failed. So let's see.
Got mine to work.
Oh, classic mistake. Unable to copy file test2.exe. The process cannot be accessed, the file test2.exe, because it is being used by another process. So what this means is I didn't close it. I didn't close it from the last time I ran the program. So I will close it right there. Close that. And now I'll run it. So it runs just fine whenever it's not already running. So I'll say 4. I'll enter 6. There we go. Doesn't do anything new, but it still does what it used to. So it's a successful change. And you said that you got it running. Can you show me that real quick? All right, and let me take a look at the code. Is it all the same?
I try to keep it the same.
Oh yeah, that looks really good. Perfect. And does it make sense?
Kind of.
Kind of. Well, that's perfect. That's the very reassuring. Okay. So one of the tasks, I want you to add another method, and this method is going to do division. Well, no, let's start with multiplication. Just basic multiplication. So I want you to take an x and y value, and then instead of adding it, go ahead and multiply it. And you can do it inside of the same program. Just don't call the add method, right?
Okay.
So you're going to replace this add with a multiply, and we'll see how that goes.
Wait, I gotta go though.
Oh no. All right. Well, we can continue later then.
Okay.
All right, guys, that's the end of the lesson. I post videos every Tuesday, and if you want to see more, like and subscribe. I'll see you next week.